Right, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. We're really excited to see you here. I see some hand waves going around the room. Thank you for joining us for our very first Shelter in Place at the studio event. We're excited to be here with Chad Johnson. He's the San Francisco Center for the Book studio director, and he's going to take a little bit of time today to tour us around his studio and also talk to us about some of the shelter in place projects that he's been working on while we've all been sort of working from home, both in our studios and at our desks. So I'm gonna turn it over to Chad without any further ado, and welcome, welcome, welcome. All right, Chad, it's up to you.
Thank you, Jenny. Welcome, everybody. Just as a brief intro thing, a couple house notes here. We are recording this so we can put it up for folks who couldn't make it today. So that's part of the reason we were asking for cameras and mics turned off. If you want to send the link to someone later, we will try and send this link to everybody who is on the attendee list. Welcome to my bindery here in El Cerrito. I have been in this space for about 4 years, a little over 4 years, but I have been collecting all this stuff for over 20. So a lot of you know me as a letterpress guy, and that's true. I printed letterpress for many years, but I started off all this really primarily as a bookbinder, and so I still have my own home bindery. So I'm going to basically what we're going to do today is I'm going to give you an overview as to how I got all this, how I got here with all this stuff. And then I'll take a quick tour of all this stuff. And then I'll show you some of the stuff I'm working on while we're doing this whole shelter in place situation through this spring and summer. So if you have questions while this is going, the best way is to chat them directly. Jenny is the host, so in your chat window, you'll be able to just click on that and send any questions to Jenny, and she'll round them up, and we'll try and get through as many as we can at the end here before we take off round one. So, as an undergraduate, these many years ago, I was doing an art semester in New York City, and I wandered literally accidentally into Pierpont Morgan Library, doing research for a sculptor. Really, is how I ended up in there. But that accidental trip made me fall in love with beautiful handmade books, and it started me down a whole path. So that's really where all this began for me. I grew up loving books, but it was that trip into the Pierpont Morgan Library. So if you haven't been, definitely make a trip next time you're allowed to fly. After that, I just started taking as many classes and workshops and different things as I could to start learning how to do bookbinding, how to make books, what is this all about. And by doing all that stuff, I was able to build up enough of a portfolio of work that I could get into a graduate program to focus on bookbinding and printing, which I did at the University of the Arts in Philadelphia, and I was there from '96 to '98. It was a really great program. Really, I couldn't recommend it strongly enough. And while I was there, I studied with Haiti Kyle and James Green and Peter Crudy and Mary Phelan and all sorts of great instructors, many other great instructors. But I got lots of input and lots of chances to learn different things. Through all that, I was able to work in libraries and conservation labs and art museums and art galleries. And so I kind of was really just submersed in the art of the book, as it were. And that is where I began collecting my equipment, which we'll get to in a little bit. So eventually I got married and moved to the Bay Area in 2000. When that happened, I began printing letterpress professionally. My wife's an art conservator, so I was getting out of the conservation game. So I printed in a bunch of shops here around the East Bay and in the city, and I eventually ended up as the pressman running One Heart Press. In San Francisco, we were owned by Michael Osborne Design, and One Heart Press was where I did a lot of my printing for over about a decade or more. Eventually, though, One Heart Press got eaten by real estate, which is a San Francisco story. And so when that happened, I came on staff at the San Francisco Center for the Book. And that really allowed me to focus more on teaching and on running a big studio and helping people, making sure equipment is available for people so they can learn to do the stuff that I learned over the years and years and years. So a few years after I came on at the San Francisco Center for the Book, the house we were renting in Berkeley sold out from under us, another Bay Area story. And so we decided at that point we need to just find a place to buy. So we looked and looked and looked, and we happened to find this place here in El Cerrito, which also happens to have this beautiful back building space. So right now I'm in a back building behind our main property, and it was just a perfect space that was just waiting to be filled up with cast iron equipment. So here we are, and that's how I got here with all this stuff. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a tour through some of the stuff, the equipment here in the studio, and I will warn you ahead of time. I have to move the computer once. I only have limited hardware access here, so I'm going to move the laptop once. So if you have motion sickness, now's a good time to cover your eyes or something. I'm just going to move the computer. It's only going to happen this one time, though. Okay, here we go. Quick ride around the studio. All right, so it all starts with this guy right here. This is a Hickok board shear. So kind of a standard board shear. It's a 32-inch blade, so it's big enough for me to cut most parent sheets and most boards from the factory, only in one direction, but still. This, I can't zoom in on the plate, but it's got a little plate on it. This is Philadelphia, PA. So this was originally in the Philadelphia Historical Society, and when I was working at a conservation lab, one of my coworkers had previously been the conservator there, and he had bought this when they got rid of it, and it was in parts. It was literally completely taken apart and in parts in his basement. And he said, "Yeah, I'll sell you this little board shear for $50." And I said, "Done." So that started it all. And I took this thing home. It was a rusty pile of metal and parts and just a shoebox full of bolts. And I learned how to put it together. And then I have since taken it apart and moved it about a half dozen, somewhere between a half dozen and a dozen times over the last 2 decades. So I'm very familiar with the machine, and it's been a tried and true part of my bindery. When we first moved to San Francisco, actually, this board shear was in our dining room because we could only afford a small apartment in San Francisco. And so I think most of the bruises have healed on my hip, but I had a lot of bruises from hitting my hip on that handle all the time. So this is the first piece of equipment that started me off, and it's a mainstay of what I do whenever I'm making bookbinding. All right, so I'm going to move the camera the second time, and then we'll be done with camera moving. All right. So once I was kind of settled into Berkeley, I started getting more and more equipment. The next 2 pieces I was going to talk about are right here, so I'm just going to turn this a little bit. So this is a tabletop guillotine. It has a 19-inch opening, what we call a mouth here. So this doesn't allow me to do super big parent sheet cutting, but it allows me to do a lot of good finishing work and final trim work. Great little machine, super stable. And because it's on a tabletop stand, I can kind of rotate it around if I need to, but it sits right in the corner there. And then the next piece of equipment that I wanted to talk about is the one back here, which is the standing press, which was actually a copy press. So now, for those who aren't familiar with the term copy press and standing press, it doesn't really matter all that much, but basically copy presses were these cast iron presses like this. In the 19th century, those were the original photocopiers. And so basically what you would do is you would draw up a deed on a piece of parchment, and while the ink was still wet, you'd put a piece of thinner parchment over top of it, tissue paper, and then put it into that copy press and squish it down, and then that's how you'd have your copy. So this is pre-photocopiers. What has happened is that bookbinders, once they stopped being useful for that, bookbinders found that they're great for using as nipping presses and flattening presses. So that's what we use them for. The fun story about this press, and I should mention, by the way, both of these I acquired with help from my friend Fred Voltmer of Havila Press. He was also a collector of equipment, and he was always helpful and letting me find stuff that I could use for my bindery. But when we found this one initially, the amount of daylight it had, and folks who know these copy presses know daylight is the amount that it opens between the platen and the bed. So the bed is on the bottom, the platen's on the top, and the amount of daylight is the amount of space you have in between those two things. When I first got this, it had like maybe 3 inches of daylight, which is not a lot, especially if you're trying to do, book work that you want to do any stands of editioning. And so with help from a machinist friend of mine, I changed out my central screw. Well, and then I also changed out these supports and bolts, and then I lengthened these stands so that I now have about, I think it's about 12 to 15 inches of daylight in this press. So it's a really handy thing to have, and it sits right here on the top corner of my work surface. And it's hard to get to from right here, but when I come around the side, I can get to it from the back. So it's really, again, another basically workhorse of my studio. Behind that, I have a job backer, which I don't use very much, but it's handy to have. So whenever if I'm doing big projects of rounding and backing, or things where I need a lot of pressure in a specific way, that's really, really helpful. The other thing I wanted to then focus on here was the work surface itself. So this is just basically a big old hunk of wood that is covered with taped together cutting mats. But what I'm going to tip the camera down for a second just so you can see a little bit. What this is actually the top of a giant flat file. Let's see, which is full of a lot of projects. So basically, these flat files came from the Bancroft Library. For a while, I was working in their conservation department, and it was while they were moving out of their previous space in order to fix it up. And these flat files, which are called map files technically because they're so big, they're about 48 by 48 drawers square. Because they're so big, they were going to leave these flat files in when they were doing the demo and just let the demolition crews destroy them. And I was like, oh, no, you're not. So me and a bunch of other UC employees came in on a weekend, and we, with permission, we cut the top apart with a table saw, and then we all took sections of the flat files home so that we could have these in our studio. So basically, this super solid giant wood top is sitting over all the storage for all the different prints and papers and boards and stuff that I kind of keep in my studio. So it's really handy to have that storage system and to have it just implemented as part of my workspace. I don't have to have separate floor space for it or find a different area for it. Then scattered around the studio, there's lots of other small tools that I have procured and built over the years. I'm going to talk about a couple of them real quick. I know I'm moving pretty fast, but we really wanted this to be a fun lunchtime hangout. So one of them is right here. Everybody who does bookbinding probably is familiar with one of these, what these are. This is called a finishing press. And this is just a standard piece of bookbinding equipment so that when I'm working on the spine of a book, I can just put it in here and hold it in place. There we go. So that allows me to work on the spine of a book while it's in there. This finishing press I handmade with the assistance and the tutelage of Tom Conroy, who's a bookbinder here in Berkeley. He and I I said I need to finish a bunch of binding tools. This was a while ago. But I needed to finish, to build out my collection, and I said, you know how to make this stuff, let's make it together. So Tom and I built, so these are cherry boards with walnut screws on my finishing press, and then it's all finished with linseed oil. We hand turned the screws on a lathe and did everything by hand with Tom's woodworking tools. So that was one part of the set, and then the other part of the set is the sewing frame. Anybody who does a lot of bookbinding knows that a frame is important for doing serious sewing, and you want it to take your time and do the sewing right. So this is a sewing frame, again, all handmade. And what we did was we hand turned the walnut screw posts here on a lathe, and then by drilling them, and then you can see I've made little parchment washers for them. They can just set right into the frame, and then I can raise and lower the crossbar by turning those individual side posts. So again, solid cherry base. I have a stick to drop in and out of the opening for feeding my sewing supports through, and then I just keep a little piece of plywood here as a sewing support, and then we actually made a nice knocking down stick, again, cherry. But the plug in the end there is where we drilled it out and poured molten lead in it, which we melted ourselves. So super healthy. But this knocking down stick is for, as I'm sewing and going along, I can knock the thread back into the gutter of the signature to make sure that everything gets pushed back in place. So sewing frame, finishing press. There are a couple things that I'm not going to get out, and I'm not going to drag the computer around for you to see, but I have a collection, I have a quick print, I have a collection of type that I can use in the quick print for when I'm doing labels. I have a vertical plow if I'm doing something that I don't want to put in a guillotine and get smushed. I have a vertical plow for doing fine trimming and fine things, and all this stuff I'm able to, like I say, tuck away and kind of keep flat or on a different surface. So that is most of the stuff that I really wanted to show to folks. There's lots of different things around, from litho stones and corner rounders and all these different things, but I don't want to go into every little piece of equipment. Instead, what I thought I'd transition to now is talking a little bit about what I'm working on here while we're in this shelter in place. The main thing that I'm working on, I can't really, it's not in this shot, as a computer, because right now I'm doing a lot of scheduling of online events and classes for the San Francisco Center for the Book while we're in this time. So if you haven't taken an online class with us, check it out. It's on our website. We're really trying to keep people connected, and so these classes are a great way. So that's a lot of what I'm working on. But when I actually get over here and start working in my bindery, I've got a couple different projects. So I am a bookbinder who likes to experiment with simple models and just kind of take things, move them back and forth, and kind of see where they get to. So there's a traditional bookbinding. It's actually our Core 3 class that we call the limp paper class. That is modeled after a bookbinding called the limp vellum, which is a very traditional bookbinding structure. And that the cover for the limp paper looks something like this. And I'll just hold these up here. So this is just an empty cover for a limp paper binding. And these holes that you see poked along the edge here would be where the supports, the sewing supports and the end band supports would get laced into this cover. And it's those supports being laced in that hold the text block into this cover. I love this model, and I love that we teach it. However, it's sometimes a little much, depending on how much book you want. And I just like the idea of soft covers. So I've been experimenting with playing with those soft cover bindings without having to do full sewn-on supports with alum Todd leather and all that stuff. So what I've got here is a book and I'll just start in reverse. So this is a model. This is not done because I'm just using scrap paper until I figure out my proportions for my cover just right. So I'm just going to hold it for a second. This is a book that I'm binding up of a copy of Norman Clayton, who was a friend of mine from back in the One Heart days. His new press has printed a edition of the Tao Te Ching by Stephen Mitchell. And so it's a beautiful letterpress book, and the Tao Te Ching is a big, important book for me personally. So he sent me a copy in sheets, and I've been working on getting this binding done. And I wanted just a soft, quiet binding. So what I've done is, instead of doing, like I said, those big supports and everything, I sewed it onto small paper tapes. So I'm going to take off the cover for a second. So, and then I sewed the text block into a chemise. And so you can see this board right here. It's not super thick. It's not stiff book binding board, but it's a heavier cardstock. And then the tapes get laced through that board and through the shoulders. So you can see them there at the shoulders. Those are the tapes that the text block has been sewn onto. And then the whole binding can just move very easily within that. Ta-da! So that's really a helpful thing. But what I didn't want to do is to have this like really cemented in with a lot of PVA. So then what I'm doing is altering that limp paper cover, and then I'll do this over my work table. I can just feed that cardstock into the paper cover. Turn this around so you can see how it goes. But I take just these so that can just get laced, slip right in, and there we go. The book is holding together with a soft limp cover on it with yop edges so that it's nice and protected, but it's still very flexible, open feeling, lays flat, very lovely to read copy of the Tao Te Ching. So that's just one of the kind of things where I just take a structure and I alter it, and then I probably made, I don't know, maybe 10 of these different covers, trying to get the proportions right and get the feel right. The other thing that I've been experimenting with a little bit is cleaning up in front of the center. A few months ago, I found someone had littered a cigarette box onto the sidewalk, and as I was cleaning it up, I was like, hey, that's a really great little box. I mean, it's not like a normal cigarette box. It opens from a spine, and it's got this little lip, and it's just super simple, and it's just paper. And so I wanted to try and recreate this box instead of a heavy clamshell box, which I've made lots of clamshell boxes. I made this one here, and again, this is a model. This is my working model here, so it's a little rough around the edges and kind of got some paint, glue stains and bubbles and stuff, but you can see it is a nice, simple little box, just paper with simple paper lips, and then it closes nice and clean. And I've got another one of my models here where I'm working on the limp paper variation. That was the object that I built this box for, and it works just great. So these things are just little projects that I keep working on and tweaking, and like, hey, how did that thing work? And then how can I make that in my studio? And so having all this stuff here throughout this time, it's just been super, super helpful for me, and a respite, a place to come to and tinker and play and remind myself that making books is fun. It's a fun thing to do. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Jenny for a second, and she's gonna let me know if we've had any questions, and then I can answer questions until we take off around 1 o'clock here. So yeah. Thank you very much for coming today.
Yeah, so I would invite everyone, if you have any questions for Chad, we have a couple already, but if you have questions about his projects, about his studio, go ahead and just type them into the chat. and I'll kind of go through them and we'll just ask them. So Chad, someone asks you if you sharpen your own guillotine blades, like for the board shear and for the tabletop guillotine. Do you sharpen those yourself or do you send them out?
So, no. Well, I do not sharpen them myself. Uh, Basically, they're two very different kind of blades. Guillotines and shear blades are exceedingly different. And guillotine blades are not something that anyone should try and do at home. Oh my gosh. So that said, I've had both. I've had the shear for 20 years and the guillotine for at least 15. I've never had to sharpen either of those blades. If you're careful and you do things, you know, you cut through things that you're supposed to be cutting through, and put it that way. You don't need to do a lot of sharpening, especially on a board shear. Shear is basically a self-sharpening blade because there's two blades that come together, and every time they pass over each other, they theoretically are self-sharpening. So the key to having a shear and keeping it sharp is having it adjusted correctly. If a shear is too loose, the arm will fall. So if you go to a board shear at some point, you lift up the blade, and then you go to adjust something and you let go and the blade falls, that's bad. A, it's super unsafe, but B, it means the blades aren't coming into contact the way they should be to sharpen themselves. If you go to lift up a board shear blade and you're going to need a hydraulic jack to get it all the way up, then that's way too tight and you need to like adjust that. But when the shear blade is correctly adjusted, it will just lift and stop at any point in its arc. And what that means is that the two blades are in contact the whole time, and they're basically, every time they go up and down, they're going to sharpen themselves and clean off any burrs or roundedness that starts developing.
Let's see, someone else asks, Margarita asks, could you talk about the layout of the tools on your work surface, the tools that are in the pockets, and which ones you find the most useful or interesting?
Thank you for the question. This is a tool roll that I made back in Philadelphia. So again, the whole thing starting back in Philadelphia. I keep them in this roll, although I don't roll them up that much anymore, but the idea is that this can just get flipped over and then rolled up, and I can take this to a workshop or another studio or some other place. I rarely do that, but that is why they're in here. So they stay right here. I keep them in the roll because I know where every piece goes, and so I know if I've misplaced something. If I look down and if I want to grab my Olfa, I know exactly where it is. And if I look down and it's not there, then I know I've got to go looking for it. So having this roll is super helpful, just keeping myself organized and knowing where things are. Favorite tools, the Olfa is right up there. I have made over the years several different Teflon folders. When you make as many boxes as I do, Teflon folders are super handy, just cranking. They don't shine the paper, they won't shine the cloth, the book cloth, the way a bone folder will. So I've got a bunch of Teflon folders that are super crucial. The dividers. The dividers are definitely very crucial piece of bookbinding equipment, and you can see mine have been around for many years and they're well loved. But spring dividers, they are tried and true, and a good pair will last you a lifetime. So if you're going out to buy spring dividers, buy a $20 pair. Don't cheap out on them. Yeah, I could talk about a lot of these tools, but maybe hopefully that covered enough for that question. We can see if there's other questions.
Let's see, I think for our last question, Paul asks, do you have suggestions for a hobbyist with limited space who's starting to have shear and guillotine envy? Are there smaller options for board shear or guillotine that might work for someone if they're working in a smaller sort of limited space?
Fortunately, the answer is yes. Cut Trimmer is the tabletop model of shear, and they make all different sizes. There's actually a couple different brands, so Cut Trimmer, Dolly, a couple of them, a couple different ones. I've found that I'm most partial to the cut trimmer series, is just the way their clamps work and the way their adjustments work for the keeping the blade tight, like I was mentioning. And they come in all sizes, everything from like 12 inches up to 42 inches. So cut trimmers are really great because they aren't cast iron. They can just be set on the tabletop anywhere. And there's also similarly what I think people are calling stack cutters, which are basically, again, a tabletop version of a guillotine that doesn't take nearly the amount of space as the challenge I have over here, a tabletop stack cutter. You can get them where they're basically like, they have like a 14-inch to 15-inch mouth usually, and they just got a little screw clamp and a blade or an swing arm that you can screw in and out so it doesn't take up too much space. I don't have any resources off the top of my head, brand names on those, but you can find those no problem. And those are the kinds of things that you can keep on a tabletop when you're working on it, and then move it to a book rack or bookshelf or a work surface storage unit when you're not using it.
Nice. All right, I think that's about all the time we have. So unless, do you have anything to add, Chad? Any last minute thoughts?
No, I'm just, it's pretty cool to be able to show off my bindery here. Like I say, I've been collecting this stuff for a long time, and I'm not a regular practitioner. I've stopped taking commissions. Really, I just do bookbinding when I have the time to do it, and it's a passion of mine. But it's so amazing, and in times like this and down times, to just have this resource, a little sanctuary to come to and just kind of continue working on the things that I've been working on for all these years. So what I say is, if you're starting out and you don't have all this stuff, and it seems like too much stuff to collect, you're right. But find the tools that you want to start with that are really, that come to your hand, that fit nice and help you do the things you want to do, and then start with those, and then start making the things that you want to make. Because I have all the stuff to make the things that I want to make. So.
I guess, oops, sorry, Chad. One last thing. How can people get a hold of you if they have questions about anything book related or tools that they may have in their own binderies or studios?
Sure. So I'm at chad@sfcb.org is my email. And like I say, that comes to my phone, so I'm constantly seeing emails, and I'm available for consulting and how part of my role at the center is to make sure that all this equipment, which is basically useless to the industry now, finds a home and gets used by someone like me who loves it. So if there's something you're looking for or something you want to get rid of, I definitely field those kind of emails all the time at chad@sfcb.org.
Nice. Awesome. Thank you so much, Chad, for spending time with us this lunchtime and sharing your studio space. It's great.
It was my pleasure. Thank you all for coming today. And
Awesome.
We're going to keep doing these Shelter in Studio series for the time being. So we're going to do them every Thursday at 12:30, just like today. And next week will be Jenny Hinchcliffe, whose voice you've been hearing. And Jenny will be giving us a tour of her studio in San Francisco next week. So we'll put that up on Eventbrite sometime in the next day or so, and you can click on that and come to the next studio, Shelter in Studio. So thank you for coming today.
Nice.
See you back at the center soon.
Awesome. Thank you, Chad. Thank you so much. And as a sort of last minute wrap up, what I'll say is that the best way to stay connected with us and up to date on all of our events and resources that we're constantly updating every week is to subscribe to our newsletter. And you can do that by visiting our webpage, which is www.sfcb.org. And we have a little subscribe to our newsletter slot right on the left-hand side of the screen. So if you want to stay up to date and know what's happening, that's the best way to keep track of us. All right, thanks everybody for joining us on your lunch break, and hopefully we'll see you next week for Shelter in Studio. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.